In the last video, we talked about the minor keys and showed how to adjust our rules so that they would work there as well. But we noticed a problem. Minor keys sound sweeter if the seventh is raised by a half step, but that has the effect of doubling the number of diminished chords and adding an augmented chord to the scale. Confining these unruly red-headed stepchildren left us with only one substitution chord. Is there some way of taming and using the diminished augmented chords? Here we have to take a giant step to the side to what looks like a change of subject. In fact, we're going to be talking about something we talked about before, only in a more rigorous manner, and that's the fact that the root of a chord does not have to be the bottom note in the chord. Here we have a C major chord. The C is the bottom note. Now move it somewhere to the top so that the E is the bottom note. Now move the E up so that G is the bottom note. All of these are C major chords, and they are all perfectly legitimate distributions of notes in that chord. We noticed this fact earlier and said we could take advantage of it, but we didn't say much about it and just use it as a license to scatter things hither and yon. But it turns out that you can treat these sundry reorganizations systematically, because every such distribution fits into one of three patterns. Either the root of the chord is at the bottom, or the middle note of the chord is at the bottom, or the top note of the chord is at the bottom. In terms of function, all these chords belong to C major, though they have slightly different sounds. When the root of the chord is at the bottom, we say the chord is in root position. It has a fairly solid sound, even when some of the notes are high up on the scale. When the middle note is at the bottom, the chord is in first inversion. Inversion just means what it sounds like. The chord has been inverted, with a bottom element moved upward. Chords in first inversion tend to sound lighter and airier than those in root position. When the top note becomes the bottom note, the chord is in second inversion. These chords have a slightly unstable quality, which can make them tricky to use. For right now, I advise erring on the side of caution and not using them. Instead, we'll take a harder look at first inversion chords. Not that there's much more to look at. We already said you could use them. All they needed is a name, which we've just given them, and a rule for using them, which is what we'll do now. It's not a hard rule either. It's just a new substitution rule. The first inversion of a chord can substitute for its root position chord. Yes, it really is that simple. So the first inversion of the C major chord can substitute for the C major root position chord. The first inversion of the F major chord can substitute for the root position of the F major chord. See, it's just like I said you could do before. As long as you're using the same notes, you can redistribute them so that the middle note is at the bottom. Also notice how the new substitution rule interacts with the old one. The old rule says that in C major, the D minor chord substitutes for the F major chord. The new rule says that the first inversion of the D minor chord substitutes for its root position chord. By transitivity, this means that the first inversion of the D minor chord also substitutes for the F major chord. Basically, anything in D minor, root position or first inversion chord, substitutes for the F major chord. So we can actually simplify our substitution scheme even further, from this to this. What this says is that either kind of primary chord can be replaced with either kind of substitute chord. And that shouldn't be too hard to remember, since we already said that. The only new thing to remember is that you've got a new toy, first inversion chords, to play with. Why would you want to play with them? Well, a couple of videos ago I mentioned that there was a big difference between this and this. Even though they use the same progression. The difference is that in the first progression, all the chords are in root position, while the second one uses a mix of root position chords and chords in first inversion. First inversion is good for smoothing out progressions, making them less blocky and keeping them from jumping around quite so much. Maybe you like the sound of the first one better than the second, or you like the second better than the first. Point is, they sound quite different while partaking of the same pattern, and the difference is in the use of inversions. And I'll make a little confession here. In a lot of my examples in earlier videos, I've been cheating and using inversions to make some of the progressions sound better. But inversions have another use. We can use them to tame diminished and augmented chords. We'll talk about that next time.